She thought my dad's money was hers, until I showed him the truth. My stepmom demanded my dad give her the keys to the car he bought me for my birthday. When he said no, she smashed the windshield with a rock. After she went inside, I finally told him everything she'd been doing to me for years, and he just sat there in silence while she slammed doors and screamed upstairs. That was 3 weeks ago. This morning, I watched her get dragged out of courtroom in handcuffs, crying about how she was only guilty of loving too much. It's funny how her version of love looked so much like a campaign of domestic terrorism. From the day she moved in, she insisted I call her mom. I was maybe 12 at the time, and my actual mom had passed away 4 years earlier. The idea felt wrong, like a betrayal, so I politely said I wasn't comfortable with it. My dad, to his credit, took my side on that one, but she never forgave me for it. That was her first loss, and I think she spent the next 6 years trying to make me pay for it. My dad's job kept him on the road a lot, which meant I was left under her care. She got his permission to discipline me whenever I was out of line, and her definition of out of line was basically just me existing in a way that inconvenienced her. If I didn't wash the dishes the second she told me to, she'd take my phone and I wouldn't see it again until the next day. If I left a book on the coffee table, I'd lose my video game privileges for a week. They were small things, but they were constant. It was a slow, methodical erosion of my life, designed to make me feel like a temporary guest in my own home. The worst incident before my 18th birthday happened when I got really sick. I woke up one morning with a pounding headache and a fever so high the room was spinning. I could barely stand up straight. When I stumbled downstairs to tell her I couldn't go to school, she just rolled her eyes. She was convinced I was faking it to get out of test. She didn't check my temperature, didn't ask how I felt. She just pointed to the door and told me to get dressed and walk to school. I tried to argue, my voice weak and shaky, but she literally kicked me out of the house and locked the door behind me. The walk to school is only about a mile, but that day it felt like a marathon. I was crying, shivering, and I must have looked like a zombie shuffling down the sidewalk. I somehow made it to my first period class and immediately fainted the second I sat down at my desk. The school nurse called my dad, who rushed home from a business trip. He took me to the doctor, and it turned out I had a severe case of the flu and was dangerously dehydrated. He was furious, but not at her. When we got home, my stepmother put on the performance of a lifetime. She told him this whole elaborate story about how she was so worried about me, how she'd begged me not to go to school, but I had insisted. She made it sound like I was a stubborn hero, and she was the concerned mother figure. I tried to tell him the truth, my voice hoarse from being sick, but he just shook his head. He said the fever was probably making me hallucinate because his wife would never ever do something that cruel. That was the moment I stopped trying to tell him things. I realized I wasn't just fighting her. I was fighting the idealized image of her that he had built in his head. And, weirdly, that wasn't even the worst part of living with her. The worst part was how she monopolized his time when he was home. He'd come back from a 2-week trip, and all I wanted was to spend an afternoon with him, maybe go fishing or just watch a movie. But she would insist that he was exhausted and needed to relax, which always meant taking her out to fancy dinners or going on weekend getaways. Just the two of them. I was too scared and beaten down to speak up, so I just watched from the window as my dad took his wife to see the world while I was left behind in the house she had turned into my own personal prison. The turning point came on my 16th birthday. I finally worked up the courage to call my dad while he was away and just lay it all out. I told him how lonely I was, how she treated me, how I felt like I was losing him. He still didn't fully believe me about the extent of her cruelty. He was too invested in the idea of his happy marriage. But something in my voice must have broken through to him. I think he realized that if he didn't do something, our relationship was going to be gone for good. So, he started making a real effort. He started taking me on fishing trips, just the two of us. He even took me along on a few of his shorter business trips, letting me explore new cities while he was in meetings. My stepmother, of course, hated it. She'd throw these childish tantrums, screaming that I was a grown man who didn't need his daddy, but that she was his wife and she needed him. For the first time, though, my dad held his ground. Our relationship got stronger, and we became genuinely close. He told me that the house would always be my home, that I could stay as long as I wanted and didn't have to move out at 18. When she overheard that, she flipped out, arguing that the house belonged to her once I was a legal adult. But my dad shot her down immediately, saying his son would always have a place with him. Even then, I never asked him to leave her. I could see that, in their own twisted way, they were sometimes happy, and I didn't want to be the one to destroy that for him. I just wanted to survive until I could leave. But on my 18th birthday, she finally took it too far and made the choice for him. I was getting ready to go out with my friends, assuming my dad would miss my birthday like he had most years due to work. Then, out of nowhere, the doorbell rang. It was him, standing on the porch with a huge cake, a wide grin on his face. I was so shocked and happy I almost started crying. I hugged him and told him that him just being there was the best gift I could ask for. He just laughed and said, "Hold your horses, I've got one more surprise for you." He led me outside to the driveway, and there it was, a brand new Toyota. It wasn't a flashy sports car or anything, just a simple, reliable car that wouldn't break down. Exactly what I would have chosen for myself. He knew I wasn't interested in showing off. I just wanted something safe and practical. It was perfect. I was thanking him, completely overwhelmed with gratitude, when the front door flew open. My stepmother came storming out, her face contorted with rage. "What is this?" she shrieked. She immediately launched into a tirade about how unfair it was that he'd bought a car for me and not for her. She said I was perfectly capable of getting a job and buying my own things, while she was the one who was struggling and needed help. It was insane. She had a perfectly good car and a credit card with no limit. She then demanded that my dad make it right by taking the keys from me and giving them to her. When my dad and I both just stared at her in disbelief and refused, she went completely ballistic. She snatched a large, jagged rock from the edge of the flower bed, and with a guttural scream, she hurled it at the windshield. It hit with a sickening crack, leaving a giant spiderweb of shattered glass right in the driver's line of sight. Then she smirked, a cruel, triumphant look on her face, and said, "I'll do it again if you don't give me those keys." Before I could even react, my dad did something I'd never seen before. He yelled at her, a deep, booming roar that shut her up instantly. "Get inside, now." It was in that moment, watching the shock and then fury on her face, that I realized two things. First, she hadn't even bothered to wish me a happy birthday. Her only interaction with me was to try and steal my gift. Second, and this hit me like a ton of bricks, if she cared so little about my happiness and could so easily try to destroy something that made my dad happy, then there was no way she actually loved him. She didn't love the man. She loved his money and the lifestyle it provided. While she stood there, still sputtering about the car, a plan began to form in my mind. I needed to make him see what I was seeing. Thankfully, my dad had finally changed. He didn't cave to her demands. He just stood there, a silent wall of disappointment, until she finally stormed back into the house. When we were alone, standing by my brand new, damaged car, I told him everything. All of it. The years of emotional abuse, the punishments, the lies, the time she kicked me out when I was sick. It all came pouring out of me. He looked devastated. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he asked, his voice cracking. I didn't have a good answer. Maybe I was just scared, or maybe, on some level, I was trying to protect his happiness, even if it was built on a lie. I told him, "Dad, this woman is using you. She doesn't love you. You need to divorce her." He was still reeling, the image of the loving wife he thought he had shattering before his eyes. He was silent for a long minute. Then he looked at me, his eyes filled with a new kind of resolve, and said, "I'll consider it." But I knew from a look on his face, a mixture of heartbreak and cold fury, that it was already over. His marriage was as broken as my windshield. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I could hear her downstairs, then upstairs, slamming doors and drawers, her angry muttering a constant, venomous hum through the walls. The crack in my new car's windshield felt like the perfect metaphor for what had just happened to my dad's marriage. A single, violent impact that had fractured everything. Around midnight, there was a soft knock on my door. It was Dad. He looked 10 years older than he had that afternoon. His shoulders were slumped, and his hands trembled slightly as he sat on the edge of my bed. He didn't say much. He just picked up my old baseball glove from my desk and turned it over and over in his hands, tracing the worn stitches like he was searching for answers in the leather. I think he was mourning the woman he thought he'd married, and grappling with the monster he now realized he'd been sleeping next to. The next morning, the sound of breaking glass woke me up. I ran downstairs to find my stepmother in the kitchen, surrounded by the wreckage of our dinner plates. She'd thrown them against the wall after Dad told her he'd already called a lawyer. Her face was a mess of red splotches and smeared mascara. She pointed a trembling finger at me and screamed, "This is your fault. You ruined my life." Dad stood in the doorway, still in his pajamas, holding his phone like a shield. She started grabbing things, shoving them into her oversized purse with a manic energy, the coffee maker, a handful of silverware, the toaster. Dad just watched her, his face a complete blank. It was when she tried to take the painting my grandmother had made that he finally moved. He stepped forward and gently took it from her hands. She spun around and slapped him hard across the face. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet kitchen. I instinctively moved between them, my heart pounding. She looked at me with a hatred so pure it was chilling. Then she let out this harsh, bitter laugh and pushed past both of us, heading for the garage. I knew she was going to do more damage to my car. Dad grabbed my arm, shaking his head. "Let her go," he said, his voice flat. "Let her show everyone exactly who she is." A moment later, we heard her car screech out of the driveway. Dad sank into a kitchen chair and stared at the broken dishes on the floor. I grabbed a broom and started sweeping, just needing something to do with my hands. The silence was heavy, like the air before a massive storm. The next few days were the beginning of her war. She would show up at random times, banging on the door and screaming accusations for the whole neighborhood to hear. She called my dad's office and told his boss he was having an affair with his secretary. She went on social media, posting long, rambling stories about how my dad and I were criminals who had stolen from her and thrown her out on the street with nothing but the clothes on her back. Some of her friends, the ones who thrived on drama, started doing slow drive-bys of our house, taking pictures with their phones. After she came by one night and keyed my dad's car from bumper to bumper, he decided we needed security cameras. I helped him install them, holding the ladder while he mounted them under the eaves of the roof. His hands were steady now, his movements precise and determined. There was a grim set to his jaw that I hadn't seen before. He was no longer a husband in denial. He was a man preparing for battle. He even showed me how to access the camera feeds on my phone. "We need to document everything," he said, "for the divorce." The lawyer, Ms. Chun, came by that Thursday. She was a sharp, no-nonsense woman who listened intently as we told her everything. When I described the years of neglect and emotional abuse, she took meticulous notes, asking specific clarifying questions. I showed her old text messages I'd saved, ones where my stepmother had called me lazy and worthless and threatened to throw out my belongings. Dad sat beside me the whole time, his hand on my shoulder, a silent, supportive presence. That weekend, we changed all the locks. The locksmith was a cheerful guy who tried to lighten the mood with stories of other dramatic lock changes he'd done, which was oddly comforting. Dad and I spent the rest of the afternoon packing up my stepmother's things into boxes. In the back of her closet, I found my old gaming console she'd taken away as a punishment 2 years ago and never given back. When Dad saw it, his jaw tightened. That night, my friends came over for a proper, if belated, birthday celebration. For a few hours, things felt normal. We ordered pizzas and played video games on the console I just reclaimed. Dad even joined in, laughing as we all teamed up against him. But I saw him checking the security camera app on his phone every few minutes, and I knew the peace was fragile. We were living in a fortress, waiting for the next siege. The police showed up on Monday morning. My stepmother had filed a report claiming we had stolen valuable jewelry from her. The officers were professional, but you could tell they were skeptical, especially after Dad showed them the security camera footage of her packing those exact items into her bags the day she left. They took our statements and said they would be following up with her about the potential consequences of filing a false police report. I started keeping a detailed journal, documenting every text, every call, every drive-by. Ms. Chun said it would be crucial for getting a restraining order. My hand cramped from writing so much, but I felt a sense of purpose. I was gathering ammunition. I even took pictures of the fading bruise on Dad's face from where she'd slapped him. School, which had once been a refuge, became another battleground. The story she was spinning online had spread among the parents in our town. I started getting weird looks in the hallways. The cafeteria incident happened on a Tuesday. I was walking with my lunch tray when Jake Henderson, whose mom was one of my stepmother's best friends, stuck his foot out and tripped me. I went sprawling, my food flying everywhere, and the whole cafeteria erupted in laughter. Jake stood over me, recording the whole thing on his phone, calling me a thief. I just cleaned myself up in the bathroom and tried to ignore the stares. My chemistry teacher, Mr. Rodriguez, saw the whole thing. He found me in the hallway and offered me a spare shirt from his gym bag, then let me eat my lunch in his quiet classroom for the rest of the week. He told me several teachers had noticed I was being targeted and were keeping an eye out. That afternoon, Dad picked me up from school early. His face was grim. He showed me his phone. My stepmother had created a website. It had a professional-looking header, Justice for a Betrayed Wife. It featured our family photos, our full address, and a long, fabricated story painting my dad as an abusive monster and me as a manipulative, sociopathic son who had poisoned him against her. At the bottom, there was a donation button. She was crowdfunding her legal battle. The site had already been shared hundreds of times by people who loved a good victim story. We drove straight to the police station. The officers were sympathetic, but explained that dealing with online defamation was a slow process. They suggested we stay somewhere else for a few nights, just in case one of the online crazies decided to show up at our house. My dad's knuckles were white as he gripped the steering wheel on the way to a hotel on the other side of town. The hotel room was suffocating. Dad was on the phone constantly, talking to lawyers, his bank, his boss. His phone would buzz every few minutes with a new notification, another nasty comment, another share of the website, another threat. Around 9 p.m., the hotel phone rang. The front desk clerk said someone was downstairs claiming to be his sister and asking for our room number. My stepmother had found us. We called the police again and spent the rest of the night taking turns watching the hallway through the peephole, jumping at every little sound. The next day, Dad's boss called. The company was being inundated with calls and emails from people demanding my dad be fired. While his boss didn't believe the lies, the constant disruption was becoming a massive problem. She had also called Child Protective Services, claiming he was neglecting me. She reported his car as stolen. She even tried to freeze his bank accounts by claiming identity theft. Each false claim took hours of phone calls and emails to disprove. It was a relentless, multi-front assault designed to wear him down. We had to leave the hotel, so Dad drove us to his old college buddy Nathan's house an hour away. Nathan had been through a nasty divorce himself and immediately understood. He gave us his guest room and promised not to tell a soul we were there. But she found us. Of course she did. It was Thursday when things went from a digital nightmare to a physical one. We had to stop by the house to grab more clothes and our mail. The front yard was destroyed. Someone had driven through the garden, leaving deep tire tracks in the grass. The mailbox was smashed. Eggs had been thrown against the windows. Our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, came over, trembling, and told us she'd seen my stepmother there in the middle of the night with a group of people, but she'd been too terrified to call the police. The inside of the house was even worse. She must have kept a key to the backyard shed. Every single family photo that had me in it was destroyed, frames smashed, pictures ripped to shreds. She'd spray-painted thief and liar in huge red letters across my bedroom wall. My clothes had been cut up with scissors and thrown all over the floor. But the thing that truly broke me was seeing my mother's jewelry box. It was empty. Dad had given it to me after she died, and it held the few precious things I had left to remember her by. A small locket, her favorite earrings. All gone. I just sat on the front steps while Dad called the police, feeling a kind of numb despair I had never experienced before. A former cop named Marcus, a private investigator Ms. Chun had hired for us, showed up while the police were still there. He walked through the house, his face grim, and found something the cops had missed. A crumpled receipt from a hardware store, stuck in the mud by the back door, right next to a clear shoe print. It was from that morning. The purchase? 2 cans of red spray paint. The next day, she escalated again, filing for emergency spousal support, claiming Dad had abandoned her and left her destitute. And then the deep fake started. I woke up to my phone blowing up with notifications. Someone had created disturbingly realistic videos of me, using my face and voice, saying horrible, racist things, admitting to crimes, and threatening my stepmother. They were spreading like wildfire. The school suspended me pending an investigation. My life was being systematically dismantled, piece by piece, by her campaign of lies. The breakthrough came from a most unexpected place. One of my stepmother's friends, a woman named Mackenzie, reached out to our lawyer. She had been a part of the initial smear campaign, but had grown increasingly uncomfortable as things escalated. When she questioned my stepmother about the deepfake videos, my stepmother had turned on her, threatening to ruin her life too if she didn't stay loyal. Frightened, Mackenzie had secretly recorded their next conversation. We all sat in Ms. Chin's office and listened to the recording. It was the smoking gun. On the tape, my stepmother was laughing, bragging about creating the videos, and detailing her plans to completely destroy my future so I could never go to college or get a good job. She laughed about how easy it was to manipulate strangers online. And then, the final nail in her coffin, she bragged about stealing my mother's jewelry, saying the little brat didn't deserve to have anything from his real mother anyway. With that recording, combined with Marcus's surveillance photos of her meeting with the known cybercriminal who made the deepfakes, the police finally had enough to arrest her. Marcus was there when they did it, documenting the whole thing. He sent us the pictures. She was being led out of her expensive hotel room, the one she was paying for with credit cards she'd fraudulently opened in my dad's name, in handcuffs. She was screaming about injustice and how she was being persecuted. But the nightmare wasn't over. Her online followers, her flying monkeys, as our social media consultant called them, were convinced she was being framed, and they doubled down on their harassment. The deepfake videos were still circulating. My dad's business had lost several major clients. I had missed the early admission deadline for my dream college. We were winning the legal battle, but it felt like we had already lost the war for our lives. The bail hearing was a circus. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Ms. Vick, methodically laid out the mountain of evidence. The stalking, the vandalism, the identity theft, the cybercrimes, the recorded confession. The judge denied bail, calling my stepmother a clear and present danger to the community. As they led her away, she shot me a look of pure venom. Her lawyer approached us afterward, offering a deal. If we dropped the charges, she'd sign the divorce papers and disappear. My dad refused without a moment of hesitation. She needs to face consequences, was all he said. The next few weeks were about rebuilding. We finally moved back home. The house felt violated, but we were determined to reclaim it. A security company installed a state-of-the-art system. Slowly, things started to turn. Some neighbors who had believed her lies came by to apologize. The school lifted my suspension, and the principal personally offered to write letters to my colleges explaining the situation. My dad's biggest client, having seen the news coverage of the arrest, called to reinstate their contract. But the real turning point was the plea deal. Faced with a mountain of undeniable evidence and the prospect of spending over a decade in prison, my stepmother finally broke. She agreed to plead guilty to multiple felonies in exchange for an 8-year prison sentence. She would have to serve at least 5 of those years before being eligible for parole. The deal also included a massive restitution order to cover all of our financial losses, the legal fees, security costs, property damage, everything. And, most importantly, a permanent restraining order. We were in the courtroom for the hearing. She stood before the judge, a shell of the confident, arrogant woman she used to be. Her voice was a barely audible whisper as she admitted, one by one, to the crime she had committed. When the judge asked if she had anything to say to us, she just stared at the floor, silent. As the bailiffs led her away to begin her sentence, she looked over at us one last time. The hatred was still there in her eyes, but it had no power anymore. It was the impotent rage of a cornered animal. The courtroom doors closed behind her, and I felt a profound sense of relief wash over me. It was finally truly over. Outside the courthouse, Dad and I just stood on the steps for a minute, breathing in the fresh air. The Toyota was parked across the street, its windshield long since replaced, gleaming in the sun. It was more than just a car now. It was a symbol of everything we had endured and overcome. That night, we didn't do anything special. We ordered a pizza and watched a movie, just a father and son in their quiet house. Dad fell asleep on the couch halfway through, and I put a blanket over him. The past few weeks have been the worst of our lives, a relentless storm of chaos and fear. She had tried to break us, to turn the world against us, to ruin everything we had out of pure spite and greed. But she had failed. We had weathered the storm together, and we had come out the other side stronger and closer than ever before. The next morning, for the first time in a long time, the house was just quiet. It was a good quiet, the kind of quiet that means peace. Life wasn't back to normal. It was a new normal, one we had fought for. We had survived, and we were ready to start living again.